The Ontario government says the proposed law that will legislate education employees back to work will include a notwithstanding clause, effectively preventing the union representing the workers from challenging it in court. With us this morning is lawyer Christopher Kinsinger, National Director of the Runnymede Society. Welcome to Your Morning.
Thanks for having me on, Anne-Marie.
Lots of talk yesterday about the notwithstanding clause. We know it's part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It encompasses Section 33 of the Charter. What does the notwithstanding clause do or not allow others to do?
So the notwithstanding clause is a relatively peculiar feature of our Constitution in that other charters and bills of rights don't tend to have any provision like this. But in essence, what it does is when it's invoked by a piece of legislation, it allows the legislation to continue operating notwithstanding Sections 2 and 7 through 15 of the Charter. To put it simply, this means that where the clause is invoked, courts are going to be unable to strike down the legislation for violating those particular sections of the Charter, which include the fundamental freedoms, including freedom of association, which is being engaged in this case.
The concern from the worker side of this is that it's using a democratic principle in a non-democratic way. I mean, the government in question here has a majority. They would be able to move this legislation through, but applying the notwithstanding clause is sort of a dead stop.
Yeah, that's right. In this particular case, where the clause is invoked, it does effectively, as I say, prevent courts from striking down the legislation for being inconsistent with those particular sections of the Constitution. But it's important, Anne-Marie, to be clear here about what the notwithstanding clause does and does not do. It's been said in recent days that the notwithstanding clause overrides the Constitution or suspends the Charter. That's not the case because it is, in fact, a part of the Charter and is therefore a part of the Constitution. So its scope is fairly narrow, and it focuses primarily on those sections of the Constitution and not potentially other sections of the Constitution.
We've seen provinces use the notwithstanding clause several times in the past few years. Ontario used it just last year to reinstate a rule in the Elections Finances Act that capped the amount of money third parties can spend on an election. And Quebec has recently used it twice, in fact, first in 2019 to cover its religious symbols law, Bill 21, and again earlier this year to cover the French language law, Bill 96. Do you have some concerns about it being having the potential for the clause to be a tool that governments use to protect laws that they feel might not be held up in court?
Yeah, we need to be clear here when we're thinking about the notwithstanding clause to recognize that it is a part of the Constitution for better or worse, whether or not we agree with that or whether or not we agree with how it's being invoked in particular cases. And so I do think we have to make room for some potential use of it, but we are starting to see it used more and more. And I do think there is cause for concern with how it's being used and whether or not governments or more specifically legislatures are providing adequate rationale for its use. Bill 21 in Quebec, I have written about myself, and I think is of particular concern because, as I say, the notwithstanding clause only applies to those specific sections of the Charter, but arguably Bill 21 engages other sections of the Charter, as has been argued by other lawyers and legal scholars, and other sections of the Constitution as well. So we need to be careful that it's not used in this broad way that upends parts of the Constitution that fall outside of the relatively narrow scope of the notwithstanding clause.
It was interesting to hear the Prime Minister comment on this use of it here in Ontario, but was relatively silent on the issue of what you were just speaking of in Quebec. Chris, great. Thanks for your perspective this morning.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.